You know, people always ask me this question, and they want some sort of comforting answer, some reassurance that there's something more, something beyond. But I think the real answer is far more interesting than any of the usual stories we tell ourselves. So let me tell you what actually happens, from the point of view of physics, from the point of view of the atoms that make you up. First, let's be clear about what you are right now while you're alive and listening to this. You are not a thing, not really. You're a process. You're a pattern of atoms arranged in a very particular way. And these atoms are constantly moving, vibrating, exchanging with the environment. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the carbon in your cells. None of these atoms are permanent residents. They come and they go. The atoms that make up your hand right now, most of them weren't there 7 years ago. They've been replaced, cycled out, brought in from the food you eat, the water you drink, the air you breathe. So what are you then? You're a pattern, a dance, a particular arrangement of matter that maintains itself by constantly taking in energy and matter from the outside world and pushing out waste. You're like a whirlpool in a stream. The water molecules in the whirlpool are always changing, always flowing through, but the whirlpool itself persists as a pattern, as a structure. That's what you are. You're a whirlpool of atoms. Now, when you die, what happens is that this process stops. The pattern can no longer maintain itself. The heart stops pumping, the cells stop producing energy, the electrical signals in the brain cease, and once that happens, the second law of thermodynamics takes over completely. Entropy increases. The organized structure that was you begins to break down, to disperse, to become disordered. But here's the thing, and this is what people often miss. Nothing is lost, not one atom, not one bit of energy. The total amount of stuff in the universe doesn't change when you die. It can't change. That's the law of conservation of energy, the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another. So let's follow what happens to those atoms, to that energy. When your heart stops, the chemical reactions in your cells continue for a little while, but without fresh oxygen, without new fuel, they sputter out. The ATP, that's the energy currency of cells, it stops being produced. The cells start to die one by one. The proteins that hold everything together start to break down. Enzymes that were carefully controlled during life now start to run wild, breaking down cell membranes, digesting the structures from the inside. Your body temperature drops because you're no longer generating heat through metabolism. That heat you were making, where does it go? It radiates out into the environment. It warms the air around you, the bed you're lying on, the room you're in. That thermal energy spreads out, dissipates, becomes part of the general background heat of the universe. It doesn't disappear. It just becomes less concentrated, less organized. Then decomposition really begins. If you're buried, bacteria and fungi, the great recyclers of nature, they move in. They're not being disrespectful, they're just doing what they do. They break down complex organic molecules into simpler ones. The proteins in your muscles, they get broken down into amino acids. The fats get broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. The carbohydrates, the nucleic acids, everything gets taken apart, step by step, molecule by molecule. And those bacteria, what are they doing with all this material? They're using it for energy. They're burning it, in a sense, combining it with oxygen, releasing energy to power their own life processes. So the energy that was stored in the chemical bonds of your body, it gets released and used by these microorganisms. It powers their movement, their reproduction, their own little whirlpools of organized complexity. Your energy becomes their energy. It's transformed, but not lost. The atoms themselves, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the calcium, they get released into the soil. The carbon might become carbon dioxide, released into the air, where it gets absorbed by plants during photosynthesis. Those plants use that carbon to build their own structures, their leaves, their roots, their seeds. And then maybe an animal eats that plant, and your carbon atoms become part of that animal. Maybe it's a deer, maybe it's a rabbit, maybe it's an insect. The atoms that were you become part of something else alive. The nitrogen gets converted by bacteria into forms that plants can use. It becomes part of proteins in those plants. The calcium might dissolve in groundwater, get carried to a stream, eventually to the ocean, where it might become part of a shell of some tiny marine organism. The phosphorus, incredibly valuable for life, it gets taken up eagerly by plants and microorganisms, becomes part of DNA, part of ATP in new living things. If you're cremated instead, the process is faster, but the principle is the same. The intense heat breaks all the chemical bonds. the organic molecules, all those complex structures, they burn, they combine with oxygen rapidly, releasing energy as heat and light. That's what fire is. It's rapid oxidation, rapid transformation of chemical energy into thermal energy and light. The carbon becomes carbon dioxide, the hydrogen becomes water vapor, the nitrogen becomes nitrogen gas, and they all rise up into the atmosphere as smoke and gas. What's left is the inorganic mineral content, the calcium phosphate from your bones mainly, now as ash. But even that doesn't sit still forever. If it's scattered, those minerals get absorbed into soil, into water. They become part of the environment, part of the geological cycle. Here's what I find absolutely fascinating about all of this. The atoms that make you up right now, they're ancient. They're billions of years old. The hydrogen atoms, most of them were made in the Big Bang itself, about 13.8 billion years ago. The carbon, the oxygen, the nitrogen, the iron, these were cooked up in the cores of stars that lived and died before our sun was even born. Some massive star, billions of years ago, fused lighter elements into heavier ones through nuclear reactions in its core. It burned hydrogen into helium, helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, all the way up the periodic table. And then when it ran out of fuel, it exploded as a supernova, scattering all those elements across space. That stardust, that debris, it eventually collected into a new nebula, which collapsed to form our solar system, our sun, our Earth. And those atoms, they've been cycling through the Earth ever since. They've been part of rocks, part of the ocean, part of the atmosphere. They've been part of countless living things. The carbon atom in your brain right now, it might have been part of a dinosaur once, or a fern in a prehistoric forest, or a bacterium in an ancient sea. It's been recycled over and over and over again through billions of years. So when you die, you're not ending something. You're just releasing your atoms back into the great cycle. They'll become part of other things, other processes, other patterns. In a very real physical sense, you will be scattered into the world. You will become part of trees and grass and flowers. You will become part of other animals, other people eventually. Your atoms will be immortal in a way that you, as a pattern, as an individual, cannot be. Now, what about consciousness? What about the you that experiences, that thinks, that feels? This is where it gets tricky, and this is where I have to be very careful and very honest. Consciousness, as far as we can tell from everything we know about physics and neuroscience, is a process that happens in the brain. It's the result of billions of neurons firing in incredibly complex patterns, communicating through electrical and chemical signals. Your thoughts, your memories, your sense of self, these all correspond to physical states of your brain. When you remember something, that's a particular pattern of neural activation. When you feel an emotion, that's neurochemistry, hormones, neurotransmitters binding to receptors, changing the excitability of certain neural circuits. When you make a decision, that's networks of neurons competing and cooperating, eventually settling into one pattern rather than another. All of this requires energy. It requires the constant metabolic activity of brain cells. When you die, when the brain stops getting oxygen and glucose, those neurons stop firing, the electrical activity ceases. The patterns that were your thoughts, your memories, your consciousness, they dissolve like a whirlpool when you dam the stream. Now, I know this sounds grim to a lot of people. They want consciousness to be something separate, something that can survive the death of the body. But there's no evidence for that. None. Every bit of evidence we have says that consciousness is what the brain does, and when the brain stops doing it, consciousness stops. Does that mean you just blink out, cease to exist? Well, in one sense, yes. The pattern that is you, the particular arrangement and process, that ends. It cannot continue without the physical substrate, without the brain that supports it. It's like asking where the flame goes when you blow out a candle. It doesn't go anywhere. The process of combustion stops, and the flame, which was never a thing but always a process, simply ceases to be. But here's another way to think about it. You, right now, are not the same you that existed 10 years ago. Not really. Your body has changed. Your memories have changed. Your personality has probably shifted in various ways. The atoms are different. The neural connections are different. In what sense are you the same person? You're the same in the sense of continuity, in the sense that there's an unbroken chain of causation linking that past you to this present you. When you go to sleep at night, your consciousness shuts down in a very real way. The kind of integrated, coherent awareness you have when you're awake, it goes away. Sometimes you dream, which is a different kind of consciousness, more fragmentary, more bizarre. Sometimes you're in deep sleep with no dreams and there's essentially no consciousness at all for hours, and yet you don't worry about this. You don't think you're dying every night. Why? Because you trust that you'll wake up, that the pattern will resume. Death is different because the pattern doesn't resume. The physical basis for it is destroyed, but the moment-to-moment experience of ceasing to be conscious, that's probably not so different from falling into deep sleep. You don't experience being unconscious. By definition, you can't. There's no one there to experience it. So I don't think death hurts, not in itself. The process of dying might hurt if it involves injury or disease, sure, but the actual moment of transition from being alive to being dead, from being conscious to being unconscious for the last time, I don't think there's suffering in that moment itself. How could there be? Suffering requires consciousness, requires someone to experience it. What about meaning, though? If we're just patterns of atoms, if consciousness is just brain activity, if we die and disperse and that's it, what's the point? Why does anything matter? This is where I think people get confused. They think that for something to matter, it has to last forever. It has to be part of some grand cosmic plan. But that's backwards. Things matter because they're temporary, because they're fragile, because they won't last. The fact that you will die someday makes your life more precious, not less. Every moment is unique and unrepeatable. The fact that consciousness is a process dependent on a delicate physical structure that makes it more amazing, not less. Here you have atoms, the same atoms that make up rocks and water and air, but arranged in such a way that they can think about themselves, can wonder about their own nature, can create art and science and love. That's extraordinary. The universe has organized itself into a form that can contemplate the universe. You are a way for the cosmos to know itself, as my friend Carl used to say. And the meaning you create while you're alive, the love you give, the work you do, the ideas you contribute, the beauty you make or appreciate, that stuff matters. It has effects. It ripples outward. The people you've touched, they're changed by you. They carry something of your pattern forward in their own patterns. Your ideas, if you've written them down or shared them, they persist and influence others. In that sense, something of you continues even after your physical pattern dissolves. But it's not immortality in the sense of you, the conscious experiencer, continuing forever. It's more like the way a wave influences the waves that come after it. The original wave is gone, dissipated, but its effects persist in the changed state of the water. I find this view, this purely physical, materialist view of death, I find it liberating rather than depressing. It means I don't have to worry about some cosmic judgment, about whether I've pleased some supernatural being. It means my life is truly mine. The meaning isn't imposed from outside. I get to decide, along with my fellow humans, what matters, what's worth doing, what's worth preserving and celebrating. It also fills me with a sense of connection to everything else. The atoms in my body have been part of so many other things. I'm connected through physical lineage to every living thing on Earth, back through billions of years of evolution. I'm connected to the stars that made my atoms. I'm part of the universe in a very literal way, and when I die, I'll be redistributed, recycled, used again in new forms. There's something beautiful about that. It's a kind of immortality, just not the personal kind. The stuff of me will persist and transform for billions of years more until the sun expands and engulfs the earth, and even then, the atoms will continue in some form, perhaps scattered back into space, perhaps eventually part of new worlds around other stars. The energy that powers my brain right now, where did it come from? It came from the food I ate, which got its energy from the sun through photosynthesis, which got its energy from nuclear fusion in the sun's core, which came from the gravitational collapse of the solar nebula, which came from the Big Bang. There's an unbroken chain of energy transformation leading from the origin of the universe to this moment, to these thoughts. And when I die, that energy continues its journey, transformed but never destroyed, part of the eternal dance of the universe, the endless permutation and recombination of matter and energy playing out according to the laws of physics. So what happens when you die? Your pattern dissolves, your consciousness ceases, but your atoms and your energy rejoin the great cycle. You become part of the earth again, part of the biosphere, part of the cosmos. You were borrowed from the universe for a brief time, arranged into this particular improbable, wonderful pattern that can think and feel and wonder, and then you're returned, given back, released to become something else. That's what physics tells us. That's what the evidence shows. And I think if you really sit with that, really contemplate it deeply, it's not a cause for despair. It's a cause for wonder, for gratitude, for a determination to make the most of this brief, precious, improbable gift of consciousness we've been given by the blind workings of natural law and cosmic chance.